Suhasini ji to take this session forward from here. And could I please request, I know we have a lot of Ravish ji fans here as well, but I'll request people to please sit, get settled. I'll request volunteers to also request the guests to please stay settled. Ask people to come and get settled for the session. This is a very important session. So I want volunteers to please take the lead and help people get settled for this session. Thank you so much.
थैंक यू दिशा एंड मैं रवीश जी से निवेदन करने वाली थी कि वो ही मॉडरेट कर लें ये सेशन क्योंकि आधा जो ऑडियंस है आई थिंक उनको अभी भी सुनना चाहता है, अभी भी गुंजाइश है थोड़े और लघु प्रेम कथाज और उसमें जो उनकी भी टिप्पणी है उसकी. We're discussing is resurgence of nationalism a threat to harmonious world order? Now the question is nationalism a bad thing? So therefore, if nationalism is not a bad thing, is resurgence of nationalism a bad thing? You know, they say that nationalism is a part of our three greatest loyalties. When you say God, country, family, or you say God, family, country, those are your three greatest loyalties. In there, should nationalism be seen as any kind of threat? I'm very grateful to the organizers for having been bold enough to ask this question, because most would say, how can you even say this? Can you ask, is God a threat? Can you ask, is the nation a threat? Or the family a threat? But I think this question comes because in the last few years, the concept of politics has changed. Not just here in India. You know, we've been speaking about India for the last 2 days. But it's not just here in India. You look in countries like China and Russia. You see in Turkey. You see in Philippines. You see in Hungary or America or Britain. The rise of a new kind of politics. Some of it is America first or Brexit related. Some of it is actually a very different kind of politics that we're seeing. A new sort of debate which encourages this kind of politics and leaders that make nationalism their main agenda. This is not something, this is why the topic says, is a resurgence of nationalism something that we should discuss. The resurgence of nationalism now has also begun to mean in many societies that there are two types of politics. It's no longer my party versus your party, my ideology versus your ideology, my economics versus your economics, because most people seem to be on the same page about which way to go on all these issues. The question has been, are you nationalistic or are you anti-national? So those have become the sort of schism in any society. Today, that is the way anybody is looked at. Ye thoda, you know, hyper-nationalist ban gaya hai. Yeah, this person is an anti-national. That's something we say very easily. So and so is an anti-national. This word that Ravishji has just thought up or just spoken of, which is white-collar Gundaism. This white-collar Gundaism very often, and I am speaking of you know, every other country in the world, because I follow a little bit of the Twitter dialogue in many other countries as well. This is the dialogue कि इससे बड़ा मतलब इससे बड़ी गाली मैं आपको नहीं दे सकती हूँ कि आप राष्ट्रवाद के खिलाफ हैं. So this means that we are seeing this new kind of politics. How do we deal with it is one question. But the question I want to put to all our speakers today is a larger one. Is this resurgent nationalism actually a threat to harmonious world order? Is it a threat to the world as we know it? Because if it isn't, we need to think maybe we should do what is best for our country and not worry about whether it changes the world and all the rest of that. There are three areas where I think we could, you know, focus our discussions. But of course, you know, whatever you'd like to speak about as well, the audience is waiting to hear you. One would be whether a resurgence of nationalism leads to more conflict, more possible wars, or is it the opposite? Is more of a nationalism going to lead to people saying, let's look at our country first and not worry about fighting with others? The second being the economic question. Protectionism of national interests, protectionism of domestic business. does nationalism shrink business prospects? When you say America first, is that going to fight with my Make in India policy? And the third being, is there a question of the international order? China is, of course, not a democracy, but we are seeing this kind of resurgent nationalism there. US saying now, ki, I don't want to get involved in your war. If you want my troops to be there, you must pay for my protection. Other countries saying the United Nations may not be necessary, and I certainly will not abide by their rulings. Are these going to be a threat to harmonious world order? Tarunji, I'd like to start with you and ask you, you've worked tirelessly, I think, in India on issues, your work on Dalit issues in particular, but we've had lots of conversations as well on the subject of international relations and on India, China in particular. In the last 3 years, we've seen resurgent nationalism in India. We've seen resurgent nationalism in China. Do you think that somewhere there, this nationalism is a threat to international relations?
Thank you, Suhasini. We must understand what we think that nationalism is all about. If you say that resurgent nationalism, I don't agree, because nationalism was right there when in Ramayana we heard Rama saying, Api Swarnamayi Lanka, Lakshmana Name Rochate, Janani Janma Bhumesha, Swargadapi Ghariyasi. This is nationalism. Even the Lanka, which is built of gold, doesn't interest me. My Janani Janma Bhumi is my heaven. For me, nationalism is being Umar Fayaz. Umar Fayaz is a symbol. He didn't give his life for salary or for any caste or for any province. He gave his life for a cause, and that cause was India. So when you love your mother, you love your nation. And I must quote a famous American Indian quote.
You're speaking Omar Fayaz of the young colonel in Kashmir who got killed.
He represents to me the notion of nationalism. He is nationalism. And I must quote this: when the blood in your veins return to the sea, and the earth in your bones return to the ground, perhaps then you will remember that this land doesn't belong to you. It is you who belong to this land. That is my nationalism. So, right from the Vedic times and earlier times, the nation had always been there. The problem is that the English-speaking, anglicized elite has started looking at the notion of nationalism from a Western viewpoint. And they equate nationalism with what we had been seeing in Germany and other places. But that is sort of a Nazism. Nationalism means to love your people, love your country, be good. For me, Lincoln's Gettysburg speech is a symbol of great nationalism. Thomas Jefferson, when he stopped and enacted a law against conversion in 1786, that was a nationalism. And so is.
But then why do you say English-speaking elite? Because Abraham Lincoln was certainly English.
That time nationalism was not taken in the other wrong ways and in swastika ways. So that was a nationalism. So for me, having your soul rooted in your nation's fragrance and soil is nationalism. It can't be a threat. The threat can be any kind of extremism. Any kind of extremism. You know, I begin, which you may be perhaps asking later on, all this issue on food platter. What you should be eating, what you should. This is not nationalism.
So you're saying that those who say that we should not eat a certain kind of meat are not speaking in the national interest?
It is only they are asserting their own food choices. They must read Vivekanand, who said that don't turn your dharma into your kitchen thing. And he was very harsh on it. Even Veer Savarkar, Even RSS chief, second Sarsanga Chalak Guruji Golwalkar, he was very harsh on those who were talking in a very negative way about the northeastern beef eaters. And he has written in Vichar Navneet, तुम लोग कभी गए नहीं वहाँ, उनके साथ समझा नहीं, वहाँ की गाय को जानते नहीं, और यहाँ बैठकर तुम अपनी बात करते हो. ये गलत है. तो a North Indian perception cannot be a whole entire Indian perception. So nationalism for me basically is represented in Gandhi's Ram Rajya. The Ram Rajya of Gandhi is my nationalism. Nobody should be poor, nobody should be unhealthy, and nobody should be illiterate. That is the nationalism that we must support, and that is a nationalism in reality, not the food platter, not your language. And I have been, for the last 2-3 years, I have been working on Tamil. So I have always been saying that only Shivaji and Vikramaditya and Ashoka cannot be whole of India unless you include Raj, Chola, Cher, Pandya and Krishnadev Rayas. Only Hindi cannot be entire India unless you have a respect for Tamil, Telugu, Bangla and Odia. So for me, nationalism is having a pan-Indian image, working for the prosperity and development of all, sabka saath, sabka vikas, and making women empowered. For me, the best example in the recent times of nationalism is providing clean fuel to women. Ujjwala.
Okay, but I mean, to come back to the question really, because we are here to talk about whether this nationalism is somewhere clashing with our international position and whether it's clashing with the harmonious world order. Could I come to you, General Shah? Because eventually when we speak of conflict, the army tends to have a belief that people have not appreciated the army as much as they could. Does this resurgence of nationalism change that?
Yes, I'd like to reply to what Mr. Tarun Vijay asked me to speak on. I spoke about Aligarh Muslim University. Let me clarify a few points. Having spent 40 years in the army, I know what nationalism is all about. I know what patriotism is all about. Firstly, let me tell you that fighting or taking action against your own people is not the job of the army. It is the job of the paramilitary forces. The army should not be committed. Having been committed in insurgencies 40 years of my life, I personally feel that the army has no role to play. In insurgencies, it only brutalizes the soldier. The Americans have learnt it. The Vietnamese vets were totally brutalized, having been committed for a year or so in Vietnam. On the other hand, our soldiers have been committed for many, many years, for almost generations, in resolving insurgencies. This is not the primary role of the army. The primary role of the army is to prevent external aggression and to prepare for war. And committing them on controlling insurgencies detracts from training soldiers to prepare for war. Another thing I'd like to clarify is that there's a difference between nationalism and patriotism. I'll just explain the meaning of the two. It'll bring out very clearly. Patriotism, what is it? It is love and loyalty for one's country. Patriotism means political loyalty of citizens to the free polity they share. That means the country. It does not necessarily mean superiority. Patriotism is an emotion based on a sense of belonging to a country, which one is willing to defend with one's own life. I say again, country which one is prepared to defend with one's own life. What is nationalism? It is an extreme form of patriotism, marked by a feeling of superiority over other races and countries. This is not what we intend to do. Nationalism advocates the superiority of culture and religion. I think this is not what a multicultural, multi-ethnic, multi-religious society in India is looking at. Nationalism postulates extreme advocacy of interests of a nation, regardless of the effect to other countries. This is not what we are looking for in an international world order. Let me give you some example of nationalism. Nazi Germany, you know where it led Germany to. The elimination of the Jews. They migrated. There were 12 million. 6 million were exterminated. 6 million migrated to the advantage of America and Israel. They got the best brains, the best thinkers in the Jewish population which had migrated to their countries. So this is what nationalism led to. Let us look at nationalism in Italy, nationalism in Japan. What happened to these countries in the Second World War? They were totally destroyed. So this extreme form of patriotism is what I term nationalism and should be shunned. Now, what happened after the Second World War? Extreme nationalism in Yugoslavia. What happened to Yugoslavia? Total balkanization of the country. This is not what we are looking at. I mean, our country is very similar to what Yugoslavia was. Multi-ethnic, multi-religious. It was a beautiful country, but it has been balkanized into small countries. The United States of America and Israel don't talk of nationalism until recently. I mean, they talk of patriotism. You are a patriotic soldier. They are looking at patriotism. Having served as Deputy Chief of the Army Staff, I can say with utmost vehemence that what we are looking for is patriots and not nationalism. Thank you.
That's a very important point you're making over there, because the truth is, I don't know if you followed the French elections. And the newly elected French president actually made this point. Of course, he was making it in the context of European Union versus those who wanted to leave it, where he said we need the leadership of patriots to defeat the threat from nationalists. And I think that puts the predicament a lot of us are seeing, and I do want to come to Sandeep ji, because I'll just let everyone have their say first, and ask you, Haraprasad ji. I follow a little bit about what you say, because there in Delhi it's always the controversies that will make the news. But I do remember when a lot of writers and academics were returning their awards some years ago. And you were not in favor of it. Today again we see some 65 former officials, IAS officers, many of them at the age of 90, have written in to speak about their fear of authoritarianism out of the prevailing atmosphere in the country right now. The question really, are those that speak in these terms, essentially taking on the concept? Because what you were saying, if I remember correctly, was by returning your award, which is a national award, you are in fact insulting the nation that has conferred it on you. Does that make all of these people somehow anti-national?
Suhasini ji, I think I have to necessarily clarify the fundamentals. I think we have been erring in appreciating the fundamentals of this question. Before joining civil service, I had the opportunity of teaching students in political science, and one of the first questions that we had to cope with is, how do you distinguish between a state and a nation? I'm appalled by the explanation given by the General Sahab here. I think the whole thing is completely misplaced. A state and a nation are two different things. A state is created when you have land, you have population, you have government, and you have sovereignty. These are the four elements of a state as per the standard textbook in political science. I have been wondering for a long time as to what makes the state a nation. There, an answer was got from one of the German philosophers again, that is Albert Sorel, who said, when these four elements are added with a new word that is called myth, you have a nation. In other words, a state becomes a nation when you have a foundational mythology which binds people together. And when does it become patriotism? When passion is added to it, it becomes patriotism. Let's be clear about the fundamentals. So without being clear about the fundamentals, we cannot answer this question. And let me tell you that all nations of the world have gone through bouts of nationalism. All states and all nations of the world have gone through bouts of nationalism. It subsides. The culprit really is internationalism. There is no problem with nationalism. Nationalism was there, will be there, and it is absolutely a necessity. And strong nations build a better world. Creation of the United Nations brought in the concept of internationalism. Internationalism is a hoax. As a professional scholar of internationalism, let me tell you, and as a civil servant who has gone through the processes of how nations conduct themselves, I have been myself an expert to the United Nations. I have seen how 135 countries of the world sit and discuss and what is the agenda and how even bright ideas are scuttled just because it is anti-American or anti-European or whatever you have. So the point at issue is that strong nations are going to contribute to a better world order, a much more cohesive world order, because strong persons can negotiate with each other with strength. Today, internationalism is actually a ploy. It's a Trojan horse through which recolonization had started for quite some time. If the countries today are becoming nationalistic and reversing that trend, I would say that is for the better. So, there is absolutely nothing wrong with nationalism. We have been making an issue out of a non-issue, and my writer friends who have returned the hours were expressing their ire for reasons best known to them. But I think everybody wants an hour in the limelight, and this is one of the ways by which some of the people wanted to express their anger. I'm extremely unhappy with the proposition that nationalism is a culprit. Nationalism is not a culprit. Any sensible people with a foundational mythology would have to have. Now, the question would arise definitely as to what is the foundational mythology of India. Is it Ramayana, Mahabharata we are going to refer to, or a multicultural, multilinguistic society? What is the foundational mythology? As a matter of fact, fortunately or unfortunately, you have concentration of a particular people of a particular race in a particular area. But when a country like India, which is almost a melting pot, you have to rediscover, redefine your foundational mythology. Mr. Tarun Vijay was mentioning about Ram Rajya. The moment you say Ram Rajya, it may not go well with a person whose foundational mythology is not in Ramayana. So we have to find out an alternative to Ram Rajya to give it to a multicultural, multiracial society in a pluralistic way. So the entire formulation has been, we are pandering, we are catering to the design of the West. Yes, it's true that the Euro-American lobby today wants to recolonize the world, and the game has been seen through by the local leaders, and that is being reversed by a strong dose of nationalism. I want it. So I don't think nationalism is antithetical, is inimical to the concept of world order. As a matter of fact, the world order is already a collapsed thing. It was never one. If you see the inner working of the United Nations system, internationalism, you would really laugh at the way we have hoisted up a huge mechanism without any foundation. Thank you, sir.
That's an important point. But when you say that there is a colonial project, a Euro-American project, the fact is that these very countries are now receding. from the world in many ways,
Yeah, Alex.
because they themselves are seeing a rise in
Exactly. They have been the victims of what they themselves planted. Americans are now having a test of it. Yesterday, just a few days ago, Filipinos have started saying that who is the United States of America to dictate terms to us? A puny little country is now going to raise its voice and say, who are you to ask me? North Korea is virtually have frightened the whole world with its own designs. I don't say. Listen, extremism in all forms is certainly not conducive to cohesive order. But passion, the music may please stop? Or is the background music, I suppose? But, anyway, as I said, the four elements of population, territory, government, sovereignty, add to it mythology, foundational mythology, add to it passion, makes it a patriotic, nationalistic person. I am not cutting out patriotism out of it, but first of all, you must understand that there is absolutely nothing wrong in the idea of a nation. Thank you.
Fair enough, and we do want to come back because I'm sure General Shah will want to say, rebut some of what you had said. But Sandeep ji, if I could ask you, you are the General Secretary of the Adhivakta Parishad, basically lawyers and advocates. And the stated objective is of resurrecting Bharatiya values and ingraining idealism in the hearts, particularly of Adhivaktas. My question really, why do you feel there is a need for this? India has been Bharat for as long as as long as history is recorded, and at least for 70 years it has had an official, formal frame of it. Why do you think it was needed?
Look, why it is needed is the way the entire system, the legal delivery system or the justice delivery system that has been inherited by us from the Britishers. We all know the loopholes of that system. So when we are saying that resurrecting the Bharatiya values, we need to know, and we need to tell the lawyers also, that you are not lawyers only to mint money. As a lawyer, you have a social obligation, and being part of Adhivakta Parishad, that social obligation we try to function in a particular manner, or we try to give legal aid to all those who cannot come to courts, and therefore we have various projects like Nyaya Kendra. And it is only legal aid which is given to them. We tell them the ways and means to address their legal issues, and then guide them to the various,
So it's a social project, not a nationalistic project.
It is a nationalistic project.
It's not a political project.
See, that is the problem, Suhasini. In today's time, when I'm saying, or when I say that I'm a nationalist, I'm looked down upon. And those guys who used to tell me that, look, globalization is not a bad thing, are questioning me because I'm a nationalist, and according to them, I'm coming in the way of globalization. And these are the same persons who opposed globalization when globalization happened 20 years, 30 years back in India. The question that we are posed today is based on a wrong premise. We think that world order has been harmonious for the entire 7 decades we are talking about. But go back to 1940s. World War II was an watershed. Everybody thought that nothing can match the kind of destruction that World War II brought about. But look at the history of the last 70 years period. There has been a Cold War. Nations after nations were merged with the Soviet Union. Soviet Union, General Shah was talking about Yugoslavia. With utmost respect, I must say that Yugoslavia was one state, which were two nations in one state, and therefore Yugoslavia became 2 separate countries. To bring that into India is totally wrong, and doing that would be doing injustice to Indian system, because India has been a nation before it became a state. On the contrary, European countries that you see, the nation state concept came after World War I, and the nation concept came to Europe. It emanated from tribes. Some tribal people, like the Greeks or the Romans, so they identified themselves with a tribe or a clan, and their main agenda was survival at that point in time. And therefore, for them, that became the unit. And from there on, the nationalism or nationalist concept came into being. But in India, it is the reverse, where the nation was already there, the state came later on. And therefore, to say that we are going through the same process and there is a kind of danger that India also will be disintegrating is totally a wrong concept. and that is seeing India from the Eurocentric view, which needs to be changed as on date.
No,
and
but
talking
that's
about
the whole question, that if somebody has a separate view, does it have to be, as Tarun Vijayji said, it is a American-speaking elite, or as you say, it's a Euro-American plot, or you say it's a Eurocentric, which means that if you have a separate opinion in this country today, you have to be outside of this
No,
country.
not at all.
You don't
Not at
accept
all.
that
Not at
these,
all. No,
that
that is
these comments can be made by also a nationalist or also a patriot.
Yes, it can be, but the point is, the point is, Suhasini, is that we need to address this issue in the right perspective. Going back 70, 80 years, as in World War II happened, then Cold War happened, many wars happened. In the 21st century, in the last 17 years, all those incidences that have happened, maybe 2001, the terrorist attack, and all those things. May I ask, all these things, could all these things be attributed to nationalism or resurgence of nationalism or something else? So if we are talking about resurgence of nationalism in some parts or some countries of the world, would have a different kind of a connotation today, it would be totally wrong.
Sure.
Because there has been a context which has given rise to this kind of a situation, which
I
we
get
need
your
to
point.
understand.
Yeah, we'll get to the discussion in just a bit. Professor, I'll come to you in just a bit. Professor Dash, I wanted to in fact ask exactly the question that Sandeep ji has said, which is that where does nationalism or hyper-nationalism end, and what happens when religious nationalism, and here we're not speaking about any particular religion, because every religion has seen a religious nationalism around the world, whether it is Christian nationalism, whether it is Hindu nationalism, whether it is Buddhist nationalism, and the current wave of Islamist nationalism that is causing, that is speaking of a kind of worldwide Islamic nation.
Nationalism. Yes.
There is only Islamic extremism.
We'll come to it. I'm talking about the concept of...
It's a ummah.
So that is exactly what I'm saying. I'm saying...
Every Muslim country is fighting another Muslim country.
All right.
So there is no Islamic nationalism.
It is a construct. That's why I'm saying that the ummah is exactly the construct I'm talking about.
That's a different idea than
All right. When it comes to all of those, where does the religious nationalism take over from all the other kinds of nationalism we're talking about?
Okay. I would have 3 points, quick points. Point number 1, we are caught in a translation trap. First, let's start with religion. Religion comes from the word religio, which binds. If I do a translation in Sanskrit, it is dharma or dharma. Dhara yatiti jasa dharma, which upholds you, makes you a better person, makes everyone a better person, becomes dharma. That is one. Nationalism is a trap we shouldn't enter into. Point number 1. Nationalism was a reaction to colonialism. And it was actually bringing people together and saying, people from outside are actually ruling us, we need to get them out. So that was the reality. So nationalism was a movement. So it's a nationalistic movement throughout, happened in Asia and Africa and Latin America throughout 40s, 50s, and 60s. So to answer your question, let me quote Gandhi, who says, my nationalism is as broad as Swadeshi. So in Indian context, if I look at Desha, Swadesha, Swadese pujyate raja, vidwanam sarvata pujyate. So when the concept of nation I talk about it, Desha, Swadesha.
You'll have to translate that for those in the audience.
Swadesha pujyate raja, vidwanam sarvata pujyate, which means that a king is worshipped in his own country. Pujyate raja, vidwanam sarvata pujyate, which means a wise person is worshipped everywhere. So the concept of boundaries, concept of boundarylessness have always been there. There the contestation has started only when politics enter into that. So it is a colonial project, which actually nationalism was was a product of that. Now, to highlight nationalism within my own country and tell that I am more national, you're anti-national, is actually a misplaced project that we should not buy into. So the patriotism and nationalism is a false consciousness where patriotism and nationalism, that binary, is also false. They should not exist. And when you have that binary, then you have either you are a patriot or I'm a national. So with that false consciousness, with that semantic of words, we are trapped in such a way, there is no way out. Then politicization happens.
All right, fair enough. I think the point you're making is extremely important, which is that nationalism actually came up as a reaction to any other kind of divisions in society. I do want to come, I will come to you in just a bit. General Shah, 3 of the speakers have fiercely contested what you've just said about nationalism versus patriotism. How do you respond?
If you equate nationalism with patriotism, I've got no problems. But when you start associating nationalism with jingoism, I have a problem. I hope you know what jingoism means.
You're just repeating, there have become so many isms now, you'll have to be clearer about.
Okay. So jingoism supposed to closely resemble nationalism, but it suggests cultural superiority. It implies military aggressiveness. This is not something which we are looking at, military aggressiveness.
India has never been a jingoistic country.
I would like to ask the jingoists, how many of them have sent sons to their military? I would like to ask them. How many of you have sent sons to the military?
I want to stop you there, General Shah, because is sending your sons into the military the only test of patriotism?
No, not certainly, but it is the acid test. It is the acid test. I am proud to say my son was in the military. My son-in-law is flying choppers in INS Rajput. So the acid test is something to be passed. The acid test is something to indicate, not plain verbiage and talking about patriotism and nationalism. Show it on the ground. Commit your people, and then we'll believe that you are really the interests of the nation concern you.
All right. Could I ask you, Haraprasad ji, earlier you had put out some tests for nationalists and said that this is against what is considered national interest. General Shah is saying that if you consider the state and the nation important, then those who are willing to protect the state become the real nationalists.
That's a very, very narrow view of this subject. I think we are getting bound by the metaphors and impressions and without going into the fundamentals. So I have been insisting on the fundamentals. Let's accept, first of all, can there be a nation without a state? My friend here said that there was a nation before the state, which is not correct. It is not correct, because what was there was a race. A Hindu people or an Islamic people, a people was there. They formed a state. And once a foundational mythology was added, it became a nation. Now the problem, the real reason why all these questions are arising is because in a multiracial, in a plural society was not conceived of earlier. So a foundational myth definitely was rooted in religion. Today when you found a multi-religious community living together in a nation, the problem is about relating to our mythologies. So we have been unintelligent enough in not seeing this and not being able to create mythologies that address to all of us, Hindus, Muslims, Christians, because the concept of secularism itself is a very modern concept. It was not a concept on which the world has been ruled for thousands of years. It was imperialism first. From imperialism, it came to nations identifying themselves. Thereafter, became internationalism. What I was trying to say is, internationalism is actually a takeoff on expansive imperialism, but masquerading as international goodwill.
It was about hegemony.
It's about hegemonic. So the hegemonic design of the West, I'm not an enemy of West.
But why just the West? The East as well is hegemonic.
East is not hegemonic for the reason that hegemony today is defined not in terms of brute power, it is in terms of the kind of impact you have. I have been a part of the trade agreements that have been done,
as well,
reservations. I was in the ILO and I know exactly how negotiations are done and how arm twisting is done to make you fall in line. So what I'm actually worried about is that we shouldn't be talking in terms of a cohesive, homogeneous, harmonious world order. Harmonious world order is a dream, and this can only happen if strong states emerge, so that they can. This is the central theme on which I'm prepared to go to any extent to argue this out.
Fair enough.
A strong nation is necessary. And religious nationalism, what is being talked about, that is because, see, India as a country, its foundational mythology is Hindu. Let's accept this, because the largest number of Hindus really inhabited this particular space.
You're saying a majority.
A majority. Now, majoritarianism, if it tries to establish itself, those who are minorities here, without infringing their rights to live and practice their religion and forms of life with freedom, I don't think there should be any objection to it. And if there is someone trying to impose his religion on somebody in the fringe somewhere, that's a non-issue, that's not a major issue. What happened to Kalburgi was not exactly a doing of the government in Delhi. The writers who returned their awards and all that. Now let me tell you one simple thing, I'll just take a minute for that. These writers who had returned the awards had organized a poetry festival, and I was there. And there I quoted to them what Octavio Paz has told me many years ago before leaving India. We had an occasion to meet him. He said, you people, he didn't know whether we are Hindus or Muslims. He simply said, you people, why do you appear so apologetic when it comes to your gods and goddesses? They are so beautiful. I have written more poetry about your gods and goddesses than you have done. Why is it you are so apologetic? So, the question addressed to me is, if I write today something about Ganesha, Durga, or Saraswati, or according to my belief, I also equally wake up at 4 a.m. hearing the muezzin and getting absolutely flushed with emotions. So all religions can partake each other, and we have no bar to practicing each other's religion. The only thing is, why should the majority also be apologetic about its religion? I start every morning after the ablutions, paying my regards to the gods, praying them for a good day, and when I come outside, I suddenly become so secular, almost non-religious. We are not non-religious.
But then that's you admitting that you feel apologetic.
No,
is there an outside force?
Yes, no, it is, no, I am being apologetic because it has been drilled into our mind that to be secular is modern, yes, but to be non-religious is not modern.
All right. That's, I think, a very beautifully put thought. But you speak of a world that is idealistic, where we are partaking of each other's religion. When you said Kalburgi was not carried out by the state, yes, but the state is in charge of law and order. And the state is in charge when people are beaten to death, not just in one state of India, but in six, seven states of India.
Is it state initiated? We have to find proof of that.
No, if it's not initiated, does law and order come under the state or not? Because this is eventually part of what is called a harmonious
Madam, let
order.
me clarify this. Law and order machinery is a part of civil service. I have seen how it functions. Despite clear instructions of a chief minister or a government, a functionary on the field can do something which is entirely non-permissible, not approved by the government and objected to by the government, and the person can be severely punished also. There are some over-enthusiastic persons in the field who can commit an error of judgment also. But if we are to really charge a government having done it, then we have to have proof of it. And if there is a proof, the citizens must rise against that government.
So you're saying an atmosphere of what is called hyper-nationalism is not to blame for this. Sandeep ji, the fact is that what Haraprasad ji is saying internally, when he's speaking about how if all the nations are not strong, they will get oppressed in the World Committee. Isn't that true of inside a nation as well? If all religions don't feel strong, if one religion feels stronger than others, then the other religions will get crushed inside a nation?
See, that has never been the position in India and never going to be. Now, coming back to the issue of award wapsi and all those things that happened and the so-called quote-unquote intolerance phase that India was supposedly passing through, I had one question at that point in time, and I have written about that also. Thereafter also many incidences happened, and I'll just give you one incident that happened in Jharkhand. One tribal girl lured into nationalism, realized that is not her calling. She came back out of that fold.
Sir, I would ask you not to give one particular thing, because then there's
another.
Because this will polarize an argument.
No,
which we
are not
trying
polarizing.
To
Let me
on
complete.
Philosophical
Yes,
basis.
let me complete.
My question is very simply: are we talking about a world order in which you are unable to see beyond majorities? Is majoritarianism becoming another word for nationalism.
Not at all. Not at all. That is for people who have seen it in that light. That is for people who are uncomfortable because of certain things that have changed in the last 3, 4, 5 years in India. That is for people who think that they are marginalized and they are not getting the cushy corners that they used to have. That is for people or the elites of India who think that they are being neglected. We can't see India from the perspective of only those people who are sitting in air-conditioned room and talking about India without going to the field and realizing as to what is happening in the villages.
Okay, fair enough. We might also say that there is now a new elite. The elite that rules India today is also an elite. But this is an important part about populism. You know, Jan Werner Mueller, who is this Princeton professor, actually said that this is the new movement. It is not a nationalism. Actually, what we are seeing around the world is what is called populism, where you are essentially taking the larger feelings of people, because there are people around the world who feel marginalized. And this is not about religion. There are lots of people who feel, as our speakers have been saying, that the elites of this world have for too long controlled power, and they need to be pushed back. Even when you see, say, a Trump campaign in America succeed, he's succeeding against the elite of his own party. He's succeeding against the elite of the Republicans. How do you see this playing out in the future, Professor Dash? Because you're actually studying a lot of these issues and teaching them as well. Right now, we're seeing a situation where each country is recognizing its own need not to be apologetic, as you said. Each country is pushing forward those leaders who are speaking about a nationalism. Do you see this as the reversal of the world order from what we saw in 1945, where the world came together and said never again and built the United Nations?
To respond to that question, let me say what Haraprasad sir has said. I agree at the broader level that international relation is chaotic. That is one. To which the recently Ian Bremmer wrote G0 world, that there is no one is taking care of anything. So that is there, and all strong nations have to be strong. And in that competition, that to be stronger, what is going to happen, there needs to be an international norm to regulate that. For example, arms race. So I want to be stronger, so Pakistan wants to be stronger, China wants to be stronger. Where do you put a stop in that? And as a Hindu, I feel, inside the Hindu, if you look at caste system, we all feel victimized. Ask a Brahmin, the feels, okay, there is no reservation. So
everyone feels marginal.
So competition goes on. So that social competition at one level is healthy, and another level needs a norm to be regulated. So where is actually then nationalism coming in? So what Haraprasad sir said, that it is important that we need to create a mythology of accommodation. So that is there. Let me start with one example. Al-Andalus, which was a Spain, medieval Spain kingdom, where Muslims ruled for more than 600 years. And there, they created an example of, the secularism was unknown then, so create an example of, if I can say, social cohesion, where minorities stayed and expressed themselves freely. So there are mythologies are there. And Akbar, Dinilai, is a mythology that which we can build on. And Gandhi coming out and saying Ram and Rahim, so creating that mythology. So have we built on that? So we have failed. We have to essentially, and Haraprasad, I agree with him, that we have failed to create that mythology of accommodation that is already there. To respond to that Islamic nationalism, it is called Islamic universalism, if not nationalism. Nations have been essentially considered as having certain kind of borders, if not essentially border-free. So actually, to come back to universal consciousness, if you look at a small philosophy of Mahima Dharma here, Sir is an expert on many of things that he will be able to comment. But the author, his Bhimo Boi, who writes in Odia, says, he says that Mujibana Pachanorke Podithau, Jagata Uddhar heu. So the right word is Jagata. So the universal consciousness is always embedded in all consciousness. Whether it is, see, Umma is not a false consciousness. So Bhima Boi's consciousness would be also equally, he says Jagata.
It's interesting you should say so, because, you know, this concept of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam,
yes,
that we often hear in the last few years. I was once researching for a paper I was doing on the origins of Indian foreign policy. In 1946, Pandit Nehru addressed the assembly. In those days, he was I think, the interim prime minister of the Constituent Assembly. And he gave a speech about what will India's foreign policy be. And he gave 8 principles. including taking care of the Indian diaspora against racialism. What was called in those days was colonialism. These were all issues. But his last one was a belief in one world, in Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam is what he said over here. Tarunji, you've been a practitioner and you've seen Indian foreign policy grow over all these years. Where do you think it can go? Will it come into conflict? Because we saw, for example, Prime Minister Modi went to Europe last week or the week before, and he essentially made very strong comments on the need for internationalism, on the need for a stronger Europe, on the need for India to be a part of a world committee when it came to climate change. At what point do you think this Indian foreign policy will clash against these ideas as nationalism springs up in these countries?
See, no country can ever work on any kind of a diplomatic relation unless its own interests are served. Diplomacy is no charity. It had never been a charity. My country's interests must be served with friendship with you, only then the bilateral relations flower. That is the basic thing of any successful relationship with any other country. So, one thing I would like to say that kindly stop buying the construct of the Germans and Italians about the nationalism. Stop it. I'm coming to that.
You are accusing others who have a different point of view of always being influenced by an outsider. Why can't they also be Indian thoughts?
No, I'm not accusing. I'm appreciating because it's only the Indians. I have not heard so far, anyone quoting a single Indian scholar on nationalism or internationalism as if all the scholarship is outside India. Stop doing that. This is my assumption. This is not an accusation. And what I say that the people who were coming to India from China, from Mongolia, 2000 years before to Nalanda and Takshila, were they coming to Murshidabad, Guwahati, or this Rawalpindi, or were they coming to India? India was always there as a nation, and that entity had been well established by Columbus. Columbus didn't come to Bombay or Karachi. He started his voyage for India. So that construct must be understood from our birth to death. That one single Sankalpa mantra. And I'm proud that we must quote our own people, own ancient scholars. And one Sankalpa mantra begins with Jambu Dvipe Bharat Khande Desh Deshantare. What is that? That is Indian national identity. It begins thousands of years before. So with apologies to General and salutes to you, sir. You are a great person. Your family is in the armed forces. My family is armed forces. Everyone, from my in-laws to my family, is in the armed forces. But that is not the final criteria. Final criteria is what we are doing about understanding the concept of nationalism. I don't buy the German or the Italian construct of nationalism. My nationalism is understanding that this nation is my cultural identity. It has always been like that. And one quote from Maulana Uddin Khan. He is a world-renowned Islamic scholar. His books are taught in Makkah University. He wrote in to our paper, and he told me, every Muslim must be loyal to his nation. Why? Why? You can decide everything. उन्होंने कहा जनाब आप दुनिया में सब चीज़ें आप तय कर सकते हो पर ये तय नहीं कर सकते कि आप कहाँ पैदा होंगे वो अल्लाह तय करता है अगर अल्लाह ने आपको एक मुल्क में पैदा किया है तो वतन परस्ती हमारे खून में होनी चाहिए That is the definition of nationalism for me. That is the definition.
I think we see it. I think when you talk about ISIS and Islamic radicalism, the fact is India does not even show up on the charts.
Just a moment. Let me complete one thing. And somebody spoke about the religious nationalism. No, sir. Nationalism is just nationalism. I can quote Lal Bal Pal, the Troika. I can quote Sri Aurobindo's concept and definition of nationalism. And I can say that it is the nationalism of the Vedic scholars and rishis that gave the mantra of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. I am a Ramakrishnite. I had Diksha in Belur Math. I learned Brotochari. The Odia people will understand. Broto loy sagbo moro Banglar sebar kaz, બાંગ્લા સેવાર સાથે સાથે ભારત સેવાર કાજ, ભારત સેવાર સાથે વિશ્વ માનવ સેવાર કાજ. So the Indian nationalism is connects me from my state, from my nation,
So you're saying
and from universalism.
there is enough
It is not petty. It is not.
Fair enough,
Yeah.
sir. You're saying that there is enough depth inside
Yes.
India to understand both nationalism and our place in the world. I think I'm getting an ishara from Disha. Disha is giving us the Disha that we have to start winding up. But before we do, can we take 2 or 3 questions? I know we're 45 minutes behind. So if I can just see who wants to ask a question, and I'll just, okay, so 2 of you and you, sir. And then we'll have to wind up this session. Inko mic aap de deंगे?
My name is Ashok. On the background of this discussion, I have a question to General Shah and Tarun Vijay ji. There is a group, we know, that they always slogan that Bharat tere 100 tukde honge, inshallah, inshallah. And
I hope you have a question at the end of this. I don't want a bhashan right now because we can carry that on.
I'm asking a question. And people like Irfan Habib are justifying that it is the dissent. And the people who say, no, it is the very ethics of national integrity.
Okay, we get your point.
They call it
There was
intolerance.
an incident in
So how
JNU where Sandeep ji has been the president. What is the question?
How do you differentiate between dissent and intolerance? What is dissent to you?
Good question. We get it.
So please,
where is my
please give me
dissent?
the clarification
Where is my
between
right to
dissent and
ending
intolerance.
with what should be my duties as a citizen?
Our panelists here. Very engaging discussion this was.